This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. Join me as I talk to women entrepreneurs about the nuts and bolts of their journeys and to experts who will give you insights that are hard to find anywhere else. Let's jump in. What do you do when your cherished startup idea vaporizes right before launch? The world shuts down and you just had a baby. How do you deal with the hand you've been dealt and still make it work as a business? What do you need to know and how do you need to adapt in the midst of a maelstrom of change and uncertainty? In this episode, Disha Gulati, co-founder and CEO of Here Market, talks about how she turned her entire startup on a dime when the pandemic destroyed their original business model, how she learned to find an attractive new market by turning disaster into opportunity, how she uses data to constantly find her way and increase the value of her offerings to her customers, and much more. Now, here's Disha. Good afternoon, Disha. Thanks for joining us today. It's really awesome to have you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
So you've had a pretty interesting journey from corporate America down to entrepreneurship. What brought you to where you are today?
Oh my, I feel like I've tried a little bit of everything. So I started my career in consulting. I spent over 10 years as a management consultant working for Deloitte and was at an inflection point being a career consultant. Was headhunted by a company called Mondelez International, which is one of the largest snacking companies in the world. And they operate in 80 countries. And I got to see how billion-dollar brands like Oreo cookies work across the world, all the way down to visiting the beloved Cadbury factory in the UK and seeing how one of the most popular chocolates in the world are made. I got to visit India and go to like the mom and pop stores. And it was also around the time where there was a big emergence of direct to consumer brands. Lots of interesting stuff happening in the CPG world, in the food packaged world. And so once again, I had the itch. At times it felt like I was in this ivory tower where we had aspirations to do a lot of transformative things, but by the time it kind of boiled down to the regions and to the brands, it was very watered down. I had the opportunity to meet some amazing folks from Gordon Food Services who run an innovation studio here in Chicago for Gordon Food Services. And it is the third largest food distribution company in the United States. They were starting to build their innovation studio here in Chicago called Relish Works and were starting to incubate white space ideas in the hospitality space, in the future of food space, sustainability, everything across the food supply chain, right from the farm to the table, and hopefully meandering through the restaurants. They were looking for experienced operators to kind of take these ideas, spin them out as their own companies within Gordon Food's portfolio. So felt like a super interesting opportunity to once again shift gears. So that's kind of my journey, the Here Market.
So what does Here Market do?
So Here Market is an online marketplace that is leading the restaurant to retail transformation, specifically for chef-driven products. So what that means is we are starting to connect chefpreneurs who are starting to either diversify their revenue streams or exclusively wanting to move into consumer packaged goods. We're helping them find markets, identify the right product market fit, and help them manage, scale, and grow their businesses.
It's clear that there's a lot in your background that we're starting to put the dots in place. But what was the trigger that made you say, geez, there's an opportunity here that I can do something about?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, it wasn't something that came out of market research. It actually came out of necessity. When I first started as an entrepreneur in residence with Gordon Food Services, we were working on a very different business concept. And this was late 2019. We were hoping to build a platform that would help restaurants with their group dining needs. So everything from discovering the right restaurant for your group dining needs. So, which could be totally different if you are trying to host a corporate dinner versus a fun girls' night out versus I don't know, your dad's retirement party. Like the vibe is different, the budget is different, it needs to be family friendly or not, right? So discovering the right kind of restaurant is hard. Making reservations for a large party is certainly something that still is very analog. So it's hard to do it online. They still make you call the restaurant and play phone tag with the events team, whatnot. And then in many instances, kind of splitting the check leaves a bad aftertaste in your mind. So we were trying to optimize this entire vertical value chain between discovery, reservations, and the payment. We built and launched a MVP platform in February of 2020. And then we all know what happened in March of 2020. I kid you not, but group dining became illegal across the country. I mean, I never thought I would say those words, but here we were, I think it was March 15th, when in Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot said, okay, starting tomorrow, restaurants are to go only, and you cannot congregate more than four people, two people. I forget what it was. And the team was just like, what are we supposed to do? This is our entire thesis. And oh, by the way, it was March 15th. So I was 35 days postpartum. So I was actually on my maternity leave when all of this was going down. And so the team gives me a call and they're like, what do you want us to do while we wait for the restaurants to open back up? Nobody knew how the next year would unfold. So we were in a holding pattern for a little bit of time. But we said, you know what? We have the resources, we have the capability, we have the team. Why don't we just help our partners, our restaurant partners, in any way we can? A lot of restaurants started to diversify their revenue streams. One of the paths that they took was to enter the consumer packaged goods industries. Here in Chicago, a lot of restaurants started to can their most popular sauces or sell their seasoning blends or sell their jams or preserves or shelf stable pasta, whatever the case may be. People got really creative. And what was really cool was a lot of these, we call them culinary creators, but a lot of these chefs, restaurant operators already had a built-in audience, right? They already had a fan base that they could start their journey with, get feedback, things like that. But what they quickly learned was that even though they were making these incredible products and they were receiving great feedback from their kind of concentrated fan bases, they knew very little about growing their businesses. So they knew very little about the front and the back door, meaning customer acquisition, direct to consumer marketing, all of those things, and everything on the back end with fulfillment and logistics. Not only did they know very little, what we also learned is they didn't want to do it. These amazing, talented chefs, they want to just make food, right? So we started to help them on a very ad hoc basis. And the more chefs and restaurants we helped, the more kind of came out of the woodworks and said, hey, we're kind of doing the same thing. Can you help sell our products? Can you help set up our e-commerce operation, so on and so forth? And 6 months into that, we took a pause and we said, feels like there's a lot of kind of grassroots pull in the market for something that is happening that we didn't anticipate as we entered this industry, but it's certainly happening. There is certainly momentum behind it, both from the supply and the demand side, right? So chefs were very motivated and the small CPG creators were very motivated to go directly to the consumer to build something. And we're seeing success with that. And from a consumer perspective, 9 out of 10 consumers want to buy small, local, direct. But the problem is discovery. Where do you find this talent? In a non-pandemic world, you would typically find some of this talent in your local farmers market, right? But again, you're geographically constrained, right? So there wasn't really a place online, if you think about it, where we could convene the supply and the demand, right? We could connect the true fans that were like across the country to these chef creators. So that's when we said, stop. What we need to do is we need to build a marketplace. That is kind of how Here Market came together.
Fantastic. I love the organic nature of it. What inspired the name?
So I get this question all the time. It is a celebratory homage. So if you think about Here, kind of people coming together over an incredible meal or drinks or celebrating something. So that's one. When we initially started the market, we thought we were connecting local culinary talent with local audiences because typically the fan bases are local. You go to your neighborhood restaurant and the neighborhood loves it and it's written up in Eater and other people come, but it's fairly local, right? Like people aren't flying in unless you're Noma or something to the restaurant. So that's what we were doing, and we thought here would also kind of emote that the localness of the marketplace. However, what we very quickly learned is these chefs and culinary creators have fans all over the country. And it wasn't always that they found their following by name. So it isn't like people were looking for a particular chef in Chicago. Sometimes they are. Like we have Stephanie Iser on our platform and people are forever looking for her, but she's on TV and all of those things. But people were just looking for better for you products. So people were looking for a better chili oil. People were looking for a better miso caramel. People were just looking for a better granola. And when they would type that in, these guys would show up. I mean, and that was the value we were adding in terms of optimizing on search keywords, things like that. And they would be like, oh my goodness, such and such chef has this amazing restaurant in Chicago. Chicago is a tough food market, but it's also a very kind of innovative food market. So this has to be legit, right? So, and a lot of our sales actually, interestingly enough, and I'd never thought about this before we started Here Market, come from the suburbs and from small town America because we're spoiled living in a big city where there's a Whole Foods and a Trader Joe's and, all of these things and many specialty stores, blocks away. But, there are towns and cities in America where that is not the case or it's not convenient or the hospitality industry isn't as vibrant, right? There aren't as many players, it's smaller market, whatever. But these folks are also wanting to recreate those restaurant experiences at home. So yeah, so I mean, we started here with this local kind of emotion, but quickly it was actually more of a national play than it was local.
Fantastic. I love the story. So you addressed a lot of the things that I wanted to ask you about. So let's go to another critical part, which is funding. How did you fund and how did you think about early on funding the earliest days of your operation?
Funding. As a founder, we're always fundraising. And let me tell you, it never gets easier. We were fortunate in the early days to have Gordon Food Services as a strategic investor. And that is kind of what got us off the ground and going. But that said, the training wheels came off quickly. So we went out there and we filled out the round with other VCs and angel investors. More angel investors than VCs because we were just we were so early in our journey. We also participated in a few accelerators, programs, what have you, that came with a check. So that also helped us, in our growth trajectory. So I will tell you that funding was easier during the pandemic when we were still figuring out the business than it is right now.
So just enough to get you going. It sounds like you had all the resources you needed. So product market fit feels like it was somewhat forced on you just because you had to turn quickly, turn the battleship on a dime. You had to adapt to what was happening in the pandemic, and you did that by serving one of your biggest, partners, which is all these restaurant folks. And especially because you had to change everything and start from scratch, how did you figure out the right business model that was now going to be effective for what you were doing, which is very different from what you started out doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that was testing and learning and just not being bound by a playbook. So because the birth of the marketplace was so organic, initially we said, okay, we're going to help with distribution because one of the things that the creators were struggling with is how do they actually get the product out the door? How do they ship it? What are kind of the details there? And we said, you know what? We can actually create economies of scale if we're shipping on behalf of all of you guys. We can get everything in one box. It's a unified cart experience for the consumer. Amazon's kind of, trained everybody or spoiled everybody to be like one shipping cost or no shipping cost and everything in one box, right? So this concept of that I would try new products, but I have to go to like 10 different sites and pay shipping 10 times was a non-starter for the consumer, right? And that typically, Shiva, also in e-commerce is one of the bigger reasons why carts are abandoned. It's the shipping cost, right? So that was the first thing we tried to solve for. And on the flip side, for the creator, I mean, the creator's working in their kitchens. The creator, has this whole other kind of business that they're focused on, which is very day to day, right? Running a restaurant. So they didn't want to run out of the kitchen 3 times a week, go to a UPS store and, send out their order. So that's kind of where we started. And it's interesting. Nick and I, my co-founder and I always talk about this in that, we didn't think we were getting into a warehousing and a fulfillment business, but here we were. And we literally learned on the job. Initially, when we started, we were ordering boxes on Amazon. And then we were like, this doesn't feel right. There has to be kind of a better setup, a cheaper setup than ordering boxes on Amazon. So slowly we kind of learned, we tested, we said, what else do we need? How do we set up this warehouse? What can we build that doesn't necessarily need to scale, but we can test with? So that was the first kind of problem that we alleviated for our creator. The next thing they wanted our help with was attracting the right consumer and helping convert their traffic into sales, right? So because they have an online presence and, they're all micro or, fairly established influencers in their own right, they could bring the audience to their social media platforms. But then the question was, how do you take it from there to a transaction? And then how do you actually get them to convert on the transaction? So that was the next thing we focused on.
And how did you crack that?
Again, I mean, everything is testing and learning and taking baby steps, right? I come from a data and analytics background. We started with how much traffic is coming to the site, what is right for our stage of the business with as many creators we had, as many products we had. Once the traffic was on the site, what percentage of that traffic was actually converting? Was that the right percentage of traffic that was converting? And if the percentage was low, was it low across all of our creators? Was it low for some of our creators? Did the quality of traffic differ in terms of, sales for certain creators versus other creators? And the answer is yes. Like these were all levers that we had to pull. And it's like an onion. You slowly have to kind of peel and be like, okay, what is this layer telling me? It's telling me that I can get the traffic to the site, but I'm having a hard time converting it. I'm converting the traffic, but it's not for the right creator. Or I can incentivize the consumer to make the first purchase, but they're not coming back, right? So these were things that we were starting to, unravel. And, some things that we specifically focused on, for example, was the repurchase rate. If we brought the right consumer to the platform who was a foodie, who followed at least one creator or knew of at least one creator, one restaurant, they would come back and make another purchase. Right. So that's kind of what we focused on. And I think we did a fairly decent job because the repurchase rate on the marketplace today is 1.8, meaning 80% of our consumers who've made a purchase in the last 12 months come back and make another purchase. Right. So that's a metric we truly focused on. And you can't really have that metric for like every single, user that comes to the site. So you have to identify who your segment is. What we also learned is when a consumer follows a creator and comes to the site, they're more loyal and tend to have a bigger basket size or a bigger transaction set than somebody that saw an ad for Here Market.
There's a lot of stuff there to peel back. So let's unpack it one at a time. First is the business model, right? So clearly you're a marketplace and you had a couple different choices. Subscription is all the rage, subscription boxes. So you had the subscription option or you had the pure e-commerce where, hey, come here when you have a need, transact, and then hopefully you'll come back again. What was the factor that helped you decide in favor of the pure e-commerce versus something like a subscription box?
So we do have subscription options available as well. By the way, both models can coexist. And that's kind of what we're focusing on right now. So we started with individual transactions because we were also trying to see what the product market fit for these products was. Also, I personally think there's a little bit of subscription fatigue in the world. right? And to subscribe to products that you have never tried before or been exposed to before is a little bit of a harder sell. And again, Shiva, food is so tactile. Like, for example, one of the things that we've learned is when we do pop-ups and, customers come to our pop-up and talk to our creators and buy their products, they have a higher repurchase rate and more of a loyalty with the platform because they've tried it and they've met the creator, they understand the story, they know what they're getting into again, which is harder to do when you're a digital first platform, right? So we wanted to start on the transaction side. And this is the thing, like, we're a marketplace, but what sets us apart is that we're not just kind of, the doors are open. As a creator, you come in, you set up your digital storefront, and off you go. We work very closely with our creators to say, hey, this is how you're performing within your category. This is where you kind of sit in the kind of price distribution of your product versus your competitor versus somebody else. These are the trends that we're seeing in the market. These are the sales kind of patterns that we're seeing on our platform as well. So that's the kind of information we're giving our creator for them to first find their product market fit before we roll it all up into a subscription. That said, we feel like we've been in business for 17 months. We're at a point where we believe that for the right products and the right configurations of assortments, we have successful subscription options. In fact, we were on the Today Show last month for our subscriptions, which was quite neat. Of course, it was our best-selling month for subscriptions that day and that month. But it showed us that there is a market for certain assortments that can be put on subscriptions. So that's actually the next project we're working on.
Well, congratulations. Sounds like you're really hitting a lot of high notes on that. So a lot of little nuances that you'd never think about if you're not in the industry. So that was pretty enlightening. It sounds like this pop-up model is a big part of kind of giving people a human feel for who you are and why Here Market makes sense. To what extent is that part of your retail customer acquisition model? And can you talk more broadly about how you're thinking about customer acquisition? It's a two-sided platform, I get it, but on the retail side.
Yeah, the pop-ups are something we've tried and we will continue to do opportunistically. For example, if you're in Chicago, we currently have a 3-month residency in the John Hancock Center where we've teamed up with World Business Chicago to just, showcase some of our most emerging culinary creators on the busiest kind of retail block in the city, if you may, right? So opportunistically, we will do pop-ups. It is not core to our strategy because, like I was saying, a lot of our fan bases and audiences are national. The issue still remains that you have to try food to truly understand it and fall in love with it, especially because a lot of our creators are trying to do things differently. So it's not the run-of-the-mill, condiments or run-of-the-mill snacks. We have these snacks called Nemi snacks, which is, cactus sticks, right? And they are so good. But honestly, if you saw them online and if you didn't know what they were, you likely wouldn't order them, right? So how do we get you to try them before you buy them? So one of the things that we're going to launch in Q2 of this year is what we call our sampling program. So much like, if you purchase on Sephora, for example, you get to your checkout and you say, hey, you qualify for like these 3 samples, which one would you like to pick? And that's kind of the program we're working on with our creators for these emerging brands and these emerging tastes, if you may.
That's fantastic. So let's turn to the creator side. What's your ideal creator profile? And then how do you go about acquiring these creators?
So we have a geographic approach in terms of acquiring creators, only because what we've learned is the creator community, the culinary community is geographically driven. So if you can penetrate the nucleus of that community, the network effect is real and it starts to kind of run itself very quickly. So as we think about acquiring creators, we think about it by market. In fact, 40% of the creators that are on our platform have come through referrals or inbound interest. Straight up non-incentive referrals, meaning, hey, I enjoy working with you guys and on your platform so much. Here's another buddy of mine who's a chef at so-and-so restaurant or is starting to launch their own product line. Would you consider talking to them? So as we think about acquisition, we think about it from a market perspective. And of course, now we've built kind of some proprietary insights into who our ICP is, what kind of products do they have, what kind of social following do they have, what is their general footprint, and how can they incentivize their fan bases to come onto the platform. So that's kind of how we work. When we think about creators, we put them in three buckets. Either they have a product and it's fairly mature and they're looking for another distribution channel or a more strategic partner. And what we offer on Here Market is very turnkey, right? In terms of the distribution, the marketing services, all of those things. The second group is folks who have a product but haven't found their product market fit yet, right? So, the world pushed them to like can their favorite or their most popular salsa. Okay, I've canned it. Now what? Right? Like I figured out the labeling, I figured out the FDA compliance, I figured out food safety issues, but the only place I sell it is in my restaurant or like on my website that who visits the restaurant website for discovery purposes, right? So where do I go from here? So helping them figure out how to commercialize their product, right, is the second category of creators we work with. And we have a set of services that we provide for them. And then the third category is complete white space. So we will have, in fact, we're working with a couple of chefs here in Chicago right now who are like, I get it. I have to diversify into products. It is the most natural thing for me to do as a restaurant operator or a hospitality group. And I think I can make these 10 products. Where do I start? Which one should I make? Kind of lead me through this entire journey. And so we have, of course, a separate set of more involved services that we offer to these creators where we help them even thinking through what is the first, second, and third product they should be launching and why that is the case. What is the search volume? What are the sales trends or patterns for the last year telling us? What's trending in terms of ingredients? So on and so forth. No two creators are the same, but we can largely kind of categorize them in one of these three categories.
I think to me, the main things that stood out were, number one is you're taking a very strategic approach to how you're selecting and nurturing and bringing out these individual creators. That was kind of like the first big insight I took away. And it's a very data-driven as well as a strategic exercise so that you're very intentional and conscious. The second takeaway was just how you segmented these creators in the sense of, A, what value are you bringing to the table? And then secondly, how do you then support them in the way that makes most sense for you, as well as the highest value added for them? So that was very instructive. So all of this is a very complicated operation, even operationally, leave alone logistically, which is we've talked about. How did you figure out the economics? Obviously, you don't want to go into the proprietary stuff, but can you walk me through the thought process and the strategy behind how you figured out how to make the economics work?
Honestly, it's not rocket science. The traditional go-to-market for CPG products is into like stores, is through a distributor-based model. So typically a CPG brand will sell to a distributor at 40% discounts, and then they tack on additional fees for slotting, for promotions, and if it's expired, they return the product to you. It is a very cost-prohibitive exercise, and there are no guarantees that you can actually get into the bigger stores. And even if you get into the bigger stores, there's no guarantee that you stay there, right? And the upfront investment that is needed to make your way there is large and sometimes unattainable for these creators. Actually, many times unattainable. Like, it's not like these small brands want to remain, some small brands want to remain small by choice, but many want to grow, but it's hard to grow through that traditional model. So kind of our economics just made sense for the creator as well as us, right? On the marketplace, they get to set their price. So if they want to, set a price that takes into account our commission, they're welcome to do so. If they want to set a price that is competitive with others in their category and somehow work in the commission in their margins, they're free to do so as well. We never pressure them to be like, your price needs to be A, B, or C. We can guide them, we can direct them, we can tell them what's happening in the market, At the end of the day, they're free to put, kind of list their products at whatever price they like. So we've actually had no one ever leave the platform. I would say decide not to be on the platform because of the commission that we charge.
Do you also provide, so a lot of these chefs, and perhaps this applies to other artisanal creators as well, is they're not business people fundamentally. They are creators, they are experts, they're craftsmen or craftspeople. To what extent do you offer support in terms of thinking about things with a business lens and saying, here's how you think about price? I mean, if they run restaurants, so clearly they run businesses, but it's a different business than CPG. To what extent are you finding that you need to help them, and how do you actually help them maximize their own economics?
To the extent they want to be helped, right? Some are pretty steadfast in their beliefs and their pricing models, and where they want to sit in that category, meaning they want to sit at the top of that category. So your chili oil is the most expensive chili oil. We will say that to them, and it's not moving, or it's hard to put the most expensive chili oil in a basket because then the collective cost of the basket is really inflated and the basket doesn't sell out, right? So we will bring these data points back to them, but at the end of the day, it's for them to decide. And honestly, it is a balance, right? If the creator can tap into a fan base, into an audience base that is willing to pay that premium because the ingredients are, premium ingredients, or the chef has national fame, right, or recognition, and he thinks he can charge those prices, more power to you, right? So to the extent they want to be helped, we will provide, some of our kind of insights are built in, but we're also working on a service which will help our creators set the price or evaluate where they stand within their category.
So you've been extraordinarily articulate about the business model. So that is a huge help. So let's turn direction and focus slightly into the fundraising side. As you mentioned earlier briefly about kind of having gotten off to a start. And then you also mentioned this comment that fundraising never stops for an entrepreneur. So first off, help me understand, how are you viewing the entire fundraising journey from the time you started? What are the milestones, the gate posts that you need to cross in terms of when you get certain specific series of funding, and how you're thinking about that?
The most obvious advice, which I'm sure if I heard it I would roll my eyes too, is go as far as you can, bootstrap. Delay fundraising as much as you can. That is hard to do with some businesses that either require a lot of R&D, or in our case is a consumer focused business, because there's a certain path to profitability that you don't get on day one. There's my disclaimer. But other than that, I think, it's so true. One is, when you say you're always fundraising, it's never too soon to start building relationships. It might be too soon sometimes, in my experience, to pitch your business for fundraising. So you have to get smart about, who you're pitching to at what stage of the business, because sometimes you just get kind of one shot at that fund or at that relationship with that person. I mean, of course, in the earlier days, I would start with friends and family and angel to the extent you can. I would also say, it's not uncommon to have your pre-seed rounds made up of investments from accelerators and incubators. I wouldn't do too many of them. And, I would be careful about the terms you're accepting. Everything is negotiable. Almost everything is negotiable. So see if you can negotiate the terms, even with programs, is the advice I would give from a pre-seed perspective. But I can't stress how much on the need to be frugal, the need to be lean, and the need to build things that don't scale. If you are an experienced operator like Nick and I are, there is this innate need to set up process to build things that will, last a while. But you just have to make the right choices and say, I know what I'm setting in place is cheap and dirty and likely won't even last us for the next 6 months, but this is what needs to happen. And sometimes you're moving fast and you're like, just throw money at the problem and then we'll figure it out. And sometimes you do that, but you have to create the right balance. So the need to always have an eye on your runway is so important, because it creeps up on you. So I would say start building the relationships. And if you're a founder who doesn't have many VC relationships at the beginning of your journey, then, even if you're like, hey, I'm just working on this deck, what is the need? And what am I going to say to this angel or this VC? Take the meeting, set some kind of relationship that allows you to like send them a note later to follow up and say, hey, I read this article, really resonates with me and what we're trying to solve for. Thought I'd share it with you. You're in the industry, or can I put you on my investor updates? And you might not have any investors, but you might have an update newsletter, right? So some of the conversations that we had in our pre-seed round didn't really get to fruition there, but now we're picking them back up now because they've seen us grow in the last 12 to 14 months. So this is why I say as a founder, you're always fundraising. For the right partnership, you might open up a round that you were thinking was done, right? So that's what I would say. At some point, I think we're not there yet, but at some point then you say, okay, how long do I want to rely on outside capital? When am I going to be done? And it is definitely a numbers game. Like, I did not believe this. I think I knew it, but I didn't fully internalize it till I had to hit these numbers to see some level of success. So it is truly, truly a numbers game. So, like, create your target list. You have to run it like a process. You have to have a minimum of 125 conversations to see some semblance of success in your fundraise process.
So when you talk about it's a numbers game, I'm assuming you're talking about the fundraising process itself, that you need to treat it kind of like a job interview or a job search process where you have to have a very big number of initial targets for you to have any kind of viable probability that you're going to hit one or two that are going to work out. Is that?
That's right.
Great.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then in terms of this definitely resonates that you don't get more than one shot at many of these investors. They're all time strapped and they don't want to waste time if within the first X number of minutes, pick your number. They don't feel that there's a fit. Couple of questions there. Number one, how do you make that judgment call that this is the right time? And then secondly, for those who don't have a starting network, what did you find effective to start building this? Let's say I start from knowing zero VCs and zero angels. Where do I start building that?
So to answer your first question, like, how do you know the time is right? You kind of don't. I mean, I think by the time I had my 50th conversation, I was like, okay, I know kind of in the spectrum of early stage to late stage where this VC stands and what my ask should be of this VC. Is it just guidance and advice? Is it, I need a check, right? And this truly holds very true. When you ask for advice, you get a check, and when you ask for a check, you get advice. So it's so true. So I think that comes a little bit by experience and trial and error. You kind of have to do the research on the VC and see what their average check size is, what is their minimum threshold in terms of how much revenue you need to have, and even within that, like, what is their portfolio and who have they invested in, what stages have they been on. You can arm yourself with that information, but then after that, it's a little bit of feel out the conversation and where the person is. So I have not found a science or a model behind that. I would say do your homework and then make your best kind of gut call there.
Second question is, if you're starting out with no network.
That actually is more easily fixable today than it has been in the past. One, like, align yourself with the epicenter of startup activity, whether that's in your industry or like kind of the generic nucleus in your city or in your function, right? Or in your industry, I should say. So for example, in Chicago, one of the bigger ones is 1871. I actually worked for 1871 for 12 months before I jumped into this venture. And the reason just for that was that I needed to build this network. I was coming from consulting and corporate. I didn't really know any VCs, to be honest. And I didn't have a pure network of other founders that I could lean into, learn from. And so that experience gave me a glide path to successfully start the business. And I shouldn't say successfully. It just gave me a glide path to have a certain set of resources that I wouldn't have had I not spent the 12 months at that incubator. Now, I get not everybody has that luxury, but I think there are enough networking events, enough activity going on in these types of incubators where you can kind of align yourself to the right quorum, the right group, and start to build your network. I said this before, accelerators is a good way to do it as well. Be choiceful about the accelerators you sign up for, but that's another way to do it, because then you become one of them, you're part of that group, and then they kind of take it upon themselves to open some doors and always be networking. So if you talk to an angel, for example, and not the right fit or even the right fit, then you say, hey, do you know other angels that also invest in this space? Right? Or, if a VC says no to us or we're too early for them, then we'll ask and we'll say, hey, do you know others who invest in, our stage of the company? The best introductions come from other founders, especially founders who are already in their portfolio. So that's another way to kind of crack that orbit of.
Excellent. And that's great advice. So this is the whole topic, but I'm just going to ask you if there's one thing that you can mention about being careful which accelerator you go to. I know we can talk for hours, but what is one thing you would ask?
So two things, is it an effective accelerator? Will it actually add value and accelerate your path? I mean, as the name suggests. And for that, I would actually talk to prior portfolio companies. You went through the program, what was good, what was bad, how did it materially help you change your trajectory, accelerate your trajectory, whatever the case may be. And the second is I've seen a lot with like very sharky terms. So that's the other thing. And it really depends on what stage you're in. It might be okay for you. It might not be, depending on how much money you've already taken in and things like that. So to the extent you can negotiate, I would negotiate, and I would be very careful about the terms. I was going to say there are also accelerators out there that you can pay to be a part of. Like, as a founder, I have not found that to be appealing, but that would be my.
You bring up a very good point, which is, you mentioned these terms, and being able to, first of all, understand what you're giving and what you're getting is a big part. And then secondly, being able to negotiate effectively what that exchange looks like is an even more important part. So first question on that, how did you get familiar with all the ins and outs and the terms and the cap table and, the term sheet and all that stuff? What advice would you give, or what tips would you give just to other founders who may not be as conversant?
Yeah, I would say get yourself a good lawyer so that they can truly break down what the terms mean and how they would impact you, not today, but 12 months from now, 14 months from now, how they impact you at your next fundraise milestone, right? So definitely get yourself a good lawyer. There's a lot of templates out there. There are classes you can go through. I believe who was, I'll have to get back to you, but YC or somebody has a whole like course on understanding cap tables and things like that. To the extent you can, Venture Deals is a great book to read. But, I have an MBA from Booth in finance, and I thought I knew what was happening with these terms, but,
touche.
You just cannot know it all. And I was like, wait, why don't I fully understand this? I learned it in school. So this is why I say get yourself a good lawyer, because they've seen many, many, many versions of these. And then to the extent you can use standard paperwork and contracts, do that. So don't make it extra nuanced.
So it sounds like, at least from negotiating your terms, a lot of that pressure gets taken off once you delegate it to the lawyers, because they'll take care of making sure that you don't get basically taken to the cleaners on.
Yeah, I mean, you don't delegate it. What they do is they explain to you, if, this term materializes, this is what will happen, or this is what will happen. Is the outcome acceptable to you or not? And it's always gray. It's, you're like, okay, am I willing to take this outcome, even if there's a 10% chance of this outcome happening, right? So at the end of the day, you have to make those calls, but at least they can break it down in plain English and explain to you what you're
Which is fair. And here's my question to you. I don't know if you can opine on it or not. So let's say they give you the choices and you're like, okay, I can make an objective assessment and say this is better than this other outcome. One part that I'm having a problem understanding is there are certain terms that are offered, this is where some of the biases come in. So how do you figure out what's happening, which is norm for the industry? Had there been no bias in question or no deviation from the norm, for lack of a better word, versus something that you're given as, a set of terms that perhaps are not as equitable as they might have been otherwise? Is the lawyer any help in that?
Yeah, I mean, the lawyer will tell you what they're seeing in the market. If you get yourself a good lawyer, and by good, I don't mean like they have to come from a fancy firm, just somebody who's steeped in the startup world and has seen enough term sheets or safe notes or things like that. At the early stage, I think it's pretty standard, the terms. So folks can easily kind of point out if there is something that's non-standard or untraditional, or if someone's trying to speak something in for various reasons, whether you're like a naive founder or, whether biases come from, it can come from your experience, it can come from your pedigree, it can come from your gender, from anything, as you know. Right. So I think at the early stage, it's easy to kind of smell that out. The later it gets, it's a little harder, to be honest. Like, the valuations folks were getting 12 months ago for companies our size are not the valuations they're getting today. Is that bias? Is that macroeconomic conditions? Is that, it's hard to tell. I think it's a combination of both, maybe. I'm a female founder, right? And a first time founder. So it's hard to tell. This is why I say you've got to get yourself, so a lawyer for sure, but also advisors, right? So we have a set of advisors that we always go back to when we're doing a raise, right? And we'll be like, does this sound right? And, in our case, we have food services, for example, in our court. So we always go back to their CVC arm and we're like, does this paper sound right? We go back to our lawyers. We're also a part of an accelerator that Morgan Stanley runs. So we're like so fortunate to have that kind of, brain power and think tank behind us to give us, some very candid answers. But, whatever kind of your board of directors is or board of advisors is for this type of stuff, build it and get feedback from people before you sign anything. Because sometimes I get it, like the need and desperation for money is high. But, don't sign up for something where you give away most of your company. What is the point of you kind of putting in your blood, sweat, and tears?
Right. And then one last question, or at least one more question on the fundraising and the pitching itself. There's some research, there's some of it's been called into question about the preventive versus the promotional tilt in the type of questions that founders get asked. What was your experience talking to any kind of investors?
Yeah, lots of preventive questions, I would say. So I am a female founder and my co-founder is also diverse. So he comes from the LGBTQ community, and many times we've felt like, the questions we get or the resistance we get is not the same resistance a serial entrepreneur or, say, a white man would get. And we see it, and it's true and it's real. And, you kind of just have to fight through it. And I think we're getting better at it. Yeah, but it exists. This is why less than 2% of funding goes to female founders every year, right? I mean, and that number hasn't moved in, I don't know, the last 5 years since I've been tracking.
One other quick question on that, and then we'll move on real quick to some of the more personal, softer issues. So there's this whole question around financial projections, models, and all of that stuff. You come from a very data-driven, financy type of background. So I'm assuming that you're pretty comfortable with it. So what I will ask you is, in what way have you found it most effective to use the financial models that you have developed? And how do you leverage them strategically, both in your fundraising and pitching, as well as potentially to set strategy and manage your own business?
It's essential for any business to have financial models, both from higher level, like this is what the 3-year plan looks like, and all the way down to like a monthly, this is what my marketing plan needs to do, and these are what the drivers are, and this is what my spend looks like, right? So, I mean, you kind of have to run your business by those models. Otherwise, it's very easy for the train to get off the track. So this is all science, right? But the art is presenting the right model to the right audience for the right reason. So what is the model and what is the financial information you give to a VC that is still having initial conversations with you versus they're moving into due diligence and they're, wanting to look under the covers versus, somebody who you are, taking the investment track from, right? So there are different complexities and different granularity of models that you need to have for those. And honestly, you don't have to recreate the wheel. Like I kind of started from a blank page, but I had enough templates and enough reference models to take into account. Again, because at the end of the day, we're marketplace business, we're e-commerce business. There are many out there. You can take inspiration. And then the other thing is running your business on a monthly basis, even a weekly basis. We do our check-ins weekly. 5 metrics and projections gives your team some teeth. Like, otherwise, what are they moving towards? Just doing better. And so how do you kind of, quantify what better looks like? So if we didn't have it, I think they would feel really lost as well in terms of like, what is it that they need to get to in the next quarter, next year, or things like that. So of course, it makes sense for us to have it from a general health of the business, but it also helps with kind of moving the business forward in terms of giving people North Star.
As you go deeper into the conversation, is there a general rule of thumb in terms of what's appropriate to share at what point in the conversation?
I don't know. Again, I don't know if there's like a rule out there, but earlier on, when we have the initial conversations, it's like a slide, right, that highlights some of the key numbers and the traction we've had, and what we're aspiring to do in the next 2 years. Once they start to look under the covers, there's a high-level model you can provide. Some say it needs to be hard-coded. Some say you can give them some assumptions to play with. This is where you have to use your founder spidey senses to be like, okay, this VC is really serious, and let's just get to it, and give them the model, and especially if you're like really confident in the model, you're like, here you go, play with it. It's strong, it's healthy, we know what we're doing. So that's what I would say. And then finally, like, once they're in your data room, they probably want to see the how the sausage is made.
Fantastic. So moving now a little bit to the softer side, this has been a pretty interesting journey for you from the day you started right before the pandemic hit. What have been some of the internal challenges that you faced and had to overcome as an entrepreneur? And what did you find helpful in keeping you afloat and keeping you motivated and energized?
Oh my goodness, where to start? This journey is a tough one. It's in the same given day, you will have had the most exciting conversation as well as like the most depressing conversation. So the highs and lows are crazy. You have to learn to still your mind and your own self-talk, and you have to figure out how to validate success along the way, because otherwise the success is whether the company lives or dies, or whether you get VC money in or not. Like, these are arbitrary goals that get just put in front of you, and to be really honest, you don't control all of those levers for the outcome. So to then hold yourself kind of to that bar, you're just mentally, it's not a healthy thing. You're going to always be in a very dark place.
So what are those internal validation methods?
Yeah, this is what you have to say to yourself is, what are the successes you've had along the way? Like for us, whether we, live on to see another day, in the last 17 months, we've built nothing to something in terms of a marketplace that has close to 200 creators, 800 products. We've done over $500,000 in revenue. I mean, these are things that, Nick and I started with a piece of paper and we said, hey, I think we should build this marketplace, right? I mean, it's something we should be very, very, very proud of. We're going to win conversations with the James Beard Foundation about, how we can play a role with the James Beard Awards this year. I mean, it's by one of the premier organizations in the hospitality space. And here we are, this, itty bitty little startup who has a seat at the table. Like,
congratulations.
Amazing.
That's so exciting.
We would have not, yeah. And it's something we didn't think was even possible, 12 months ago. So, I mean, I think you have to remind yourself, your validation has to come from within as opposed to the externally. Is, I think, one of the biggest kind of changes I've had to make in the way I think about it, and especially in this world of entrepreneurship. Like, there are a lot of smoking mirrors, like a lot of fake it till you make it. So if you go on to like LinkedIn or social media and it's like, oh, I did this and I closed this and I was here and this happened, and you have to like kind of stay straight to your course and be like, good for them. I'm sure that's helping them get places or not get places. Because how many times, Shubha, have you like seen somebody go, oh my goodness, we were on CNBC yesterday and then 2 weeks later we shut down the company, right? So you have to kind of adjust your emotions as it comes to like how other founders in your cohort are doing, or how other companies are doing, and how they closed around or didn't close around. Maybe they closed around, but like the terms were horrific. Like, what is the point? The biggest lesson that I've had is, how do you internally keep yourself motivated? And, when I have rough days or down days, I think about two things. One is, would I rather be doing something else than this? And the answer is, I'd always be doing this than whatever I was doing before, because this is way more fun and this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to start something. I wanted to experience that. And the outcome of this experience is not just a black and white L versus W. Like, the outcome of this experience is everything I've learned along the way. How to become a better operator, a better person, honestly, a more empathetic, humble person than I was before. So you have to kind of remember that. Let me come back to my second thing because I just remembered it, which was to have the right support structure around you. It is so important to have the right partner, spouse, family, whatever, whoever gives you that at the end of the day validation that the path you've picked, the journey you're on is worth it, is the people you need to align yourself with. And not the people who are like, what are you doing? Why would you ever choose to like live a life of an entrepreneur? And there's a mixed bag of like, even with family, a mixed bag of, comments and emotions that come along the way. So I would say manage your own self-talk, because like no one else can make or break how you mentally feel. And especially as the leader or the founder of a company, it's very important for your attitude to be right, because whatever is reflected on your face is reflected on the team. And we're a small team, so you can't really hide. And the second is when you go home at night, you need to have the right support.
Perfect. What have been some of the highlight moments that made you light up and say, this is exactly why I'm here. This is exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing?
The James Bay partnership is fantastic. The fact that we were on the Today Show, that's like national. Like I had people calling me who I haven't spoken to in years and be like, oh my goodness, I saw Here's Your Market on the Today Show. And that was a win for us. Late last year, we made it into the Morgan Stanley Accelerator program, which is very, very competitive. They take 5 out of 2,500 companies that apply each year. It's an accelerator that truly helped, kind of guide us through some of our growing pains in the last 6 months. So that to us has been phenomenal, and we feel lucky and fortunate to be a part of that program. But honestly, like what keeps us going is when we get to talk to our creators, and our creators talk about how much value we've added to their journey, to their businesses, the exposure they're getting through us, and the consumer the base that they're building on social market, and even the press they're getting through us. Because again, it's easy to promote a collection of creators and a collection of products than it is to just take your one product and pound the pavement. We were in the Food Network holiday list in December, and we were the number one gift on their gift guide. And it was just
that is amazing. Congratulations.
Right? So thank you. We've had a lot of highlights, but what makes us is our creators. Right? They just have such incredible product and such incredible stories to tell that it's easy to amplify that.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So then to conclude, the last couple of questions, what is it that you know today that you wish you knew when you started this journey?
I feel like every entrepreneur starts with some like naivety and ignorance. I feel like if I knew exactly how the sausage was made, I don't know if I would have started the journey. Just knowing what the lift is. But I mean, now that we're on the journey, it's totally worth it. And I'm so glad to have done it. What would I have done differently? I don't know if there is anything I would say I would have done differently, because even the things that we didn't do right, even the mistakes that we made, it was, it's a test and learn process, right? So I don't know if I could have built a startup with like 0 errors, right? So the only thing I would say is that, when you're a small team, the people really matter. So, and we've been lucky to have a great team, and I've been lucky that, Nick and I like we work together, we gel well together, but, be very choiceful about the people that you choose to like take on the ride with you, because that too could be a mental and financial drain, honestly.
Fantastic. And then anything additional that you tell other entrepreneurs who are just starting out?
I would say, the struggle is real, but honestly, I don't think I've done anything more fulfilling than what I've done. I've worked for 20 years of my life, and I've not done anything more fulfilling than what I've done in the last 17 months. So if you have the opportunity and the circumstances are right, take the leap.
Thank you. Is there any question that I wish I'd asked you, but I didn't?
No, you asked me a lot of questions.
I've been accused of that before, but let me tell you that this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for being candid. Thank you for being thoughtful and very, very helpful in terms of the experiences you shared, the perspectives you offered, lots of guidance and lots of value. So thank you so much. And we'll be really excited to see all the heights that you and Here Market reach.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on, Shubha. This is such an amazing platform, and I'm appreciative for everything you're doing with spreading the word around financial wellness and access to funding and capital for founders, and especially female founders, because again, like, we got to do something to change.
I agree with you, and you're the stars that make it possible. So thanks for that. My conversation with Disha was fascinating because it deals with something we all know and love, food. But the layers and nuances of making something as simple as connecting our unique tastes with new creations we love are so vast. There were many light bulbs here for me, but here are 10 that I noted. 1. Be grounded enough in your domain that you know it inside out, but not so grounded in your idea that you can't change course when needed. 2. That old saw is true. You can't get very far by doing what you can, where you are, with what you have, even in the midst of shattering change. 3. Read the ways your market is behaving through the lens of your capabilities to find new opportunities. 4. In the beginning, it is much smarter to do things that don't scale and maybe even treat your business model as disposable. 5. Back your observations and instincts with hard data. If they both don't tell the same story, you haven't found your story yet. 6. To find your competitive advantages, understand how your consumers and customers behave at the micro and nano level. That's your chance to beat the Amazons of the world. 7. Find the micro level KPIs in your business that impact the big ones that investors care about. The tighter that link, the better you'll run your business. 8. The context of the purchase may have unexpected impacts on your business. Look at their behavior holistically. That's how your customers are experiencing it. 9. The common sense advice on bootstrapping as much as possible never changes. How far can you go on your own? How much can you stretch? 10. Fundraising is part art, part science, and part instinct. Hone yours carefully. So, what's the one big takeaway you have from this conversation? And how can you make that happen? Thanks for listening to today's episode. We have show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achiiv.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe and share with a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go be an achiever.